welcome. Thank you for joining us for the last talk of the day, entitled A Library of Earthen Architecture, a Conversation on Experimental Preservation and Heritage. We're joined by Jorge Otero Pailos, one of our participating artists in the Biennale, who many of you would have seen his work in Gallery B6. And he's collaborated with a group of Saudi artists and heritage and cultural experts to begin a conversation around heritage in Saudi. So I'll leave it to Jorge to present our speakers. Thank you very much.
Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. And thank you, Amina, for the introduction. I want to take this opportunity to thank Ute Metabauer for this amazing biennial and to congratulate her on this incredible gathering of artists from around the world. It's really remarkable. I've really enjoyed this participating in the biennial. It's been a long process, started about a year ago, and I feel really humbled and fortunate to have been given the opportunity to use this platform to collaborate with an incredibly gifted set of Saudi artists who are here today and with whom we have produced a collaborative work called the Library of Earthen Architectures. I'll introduce them all in a second. I'm deeply grateful that you're all here. I see many friends in the audience, and I want to say thank you to all of you for being here, and I particularly want to acknowledge Francesca Thyssen, who's a dear friend, and I appreciate you being here today, Sissel as well, all of you. So thank you all for being here. The whole project began with a very simple premise. I think many of you have probably moved apartments, moved houses, and you've had to decide, I keep this couch, I throw this couch, I keep this table, I leave this table, what do I do? You have to make choices. And it seemed very clear that Saudi society is in the process of a major move from one house to another, and from one time to another, from the past to the future. And so we asked ourselves as artists, what do we need to keep to make sure that the future is what we imagine it to be? What do we want to bring along from our houses? So this was really a conversation about houses, about architecture, and about what we bring into the future with that. And so each of us made a choice and chose a ready-made. You will see there are a lot of references to Duchamp here. This is a dialogue with the notion, the tradition of the ready-made. But the ready-made brought into the world of heritage and of memory. So I want to introduce everyone here around the table, starting, well, I guess I'll go in order. Nawaf Benayaf, Dania Al-Saleh, Filwa Nazar, Paola Pesaresi, Fahad bin Naef, Ala Tarabuzzini, Abdul Rahman Gazaz, Turki Gazaz, and Ahmed Mater. Each of them is going to talk about the objects that they chose. And I want to also make sure to acknowledge that Sara Alisa and Najud Al-Sudairi from Sin Architects also participated in this project, but couldn't make it because they're actually leading a tour of the earthen architecture of Diriyah. So we are in an area that is, of course, an earthen architecture area. And Saudi society is in a big transition, but the world is in a big transition as well. There was a big move from the farm to the city in the 20th century. About 65% of the world's population lives in earthen architecture. And there's a big move now from earthen architecture to concrete architecture, which is happening all around us. So part of this Library of Earthen Architectures is to think about the knowledge that we want to transmit to the future through art. So I think we'll go in this order. and we can start our conversation about the different pieces that we each contributed, and to hear a little bit about what were you trying to transmit to the future. But actually, I'm gonna take that back. I think it's important in terms of context to start with Paola. And I will, so, and Paola, allow me to introduce you. Paola Pesaresi is in charge of the heritage management of the Aturaif World Heritage Site, which is next door to us. We are really next door to a World Heritage Site. And there's a really important history in terms of the Saudi story in this site. So if you could just tell us in 1 minute what that story is, it would be a great start to our conversation.
Thank you very much. It's quite challenging, but I will do my best. So as Jorge mentioned it, we are very next door to the World Heritage Site of Aturaif in Diriyah, which is one of the districts, the most important district of ancient Diriyah, that represent the apex of the first Saudi state, and it has a very interesting life, even if it lasted less than 1 century from the foundation to the disruption and abandonment in 1818. What is very interesting of what, together with Jorge, we decided to pick up as something to bring in a capsule of time, is the essence of this earthen architecture that reached the apex of the Najdi style in the Najdi history in Turaif. So we went into the archaeological area, that is the unexplored part of the ancient town, because it's basically the day after the abandonment. When you walk into these ruins, you see the aspect of these ruins as they were in 1818. And this is very touching, because we go and we have the possibility of, all of us, to visit Aturaif, but we will see the part of the town that has been re-inhabited during the 20th century. And there is another part of the town that has not been uncovered yet, and it will be soon uncovered. But there we took this dust, which is basically the part of the earth that fell down, and it's a representation of time, a representation that time that passed, and the resistance of the heritage in face of transition, changes, battles of humans, and climate change recently in the last few decades. And so it's representative of the history, of the legacy, but also of how, through conservation, we're trying to slow down this process of the big old men that we want to have it lasted for a long time.
Thank you. Filwa, you selected a wedding dress with a very beautiful name that has to do with architecture. Would you tell us a little bit about what you were trying to transmit with that?
So the item I chose is called Darfat al-Bab. Darfat al-Bab translates as the main part of the door, literally the part that closes and opens. And when I had the conversation with you and we talked generally about my practice and its link to architecture, I looked through some books and I found this item. And I thought this would be a very interesting choice as it links to architecture as well. And it's called Darfat al-Bab because it's actually, the embroidery is very heavy. The embroidery is the same both on the front and the back. And it's inspired, its motifs from the Hijazi doors of Saudi.
So such a beautiful idea of transition and moving from one life to another, unmarried to married. It's architecture entry is so much in that wedding dress. Danya, you selected a smell and an incense burner.
Well, the objects I chose are quite significant for me. There were two actually. One is the incense burner, al-mabkhara, and the other one is called Diriyah, which was used as a lipstick stain many, many years ago. And these objects are significant for me because they serve as a link, as a conduit to a past generation, a generation that I related to, which was my grandmother. With the Diriyah, the lipstick stain, she was the one who introduced it to me when I was at an age where I couldn't use any kind of makeup. And it was, a sneaky way to, as a teenager, a young teenager, to use this and get away with it. The mabkhara is still relevant today, but not as before. And so coming from four generations, my grandmother, my parents, myself, and my daughter, it is being less used as, not like as before, where my grandmother was, the household where my grandmother used to live with my uncles, was used from morning to night, and it was a morning ritual. It was greeting guests. The household had open door policy. And then my parents it wasn't used as before, maybe occasionally in probably once a week when we gather, all the family members gather. I don't use it a lot, only very rarely. And definitely my daughter doesn't use it unless I do. So these items are really important to preserve. And it's associated with the intangible aspect of it, which is the memory, the ritual, the everyday. And it's as important as preserving the object himself, which reflect these memories.
Thank you. That is so wonderful to think that architecture can be a smell, that you can create a home just through the experience. I take that with me. Ala, you selected with Fahad a fossil. Tell us about that.
So Fahad and I selected a fossil, which is an object that we found in 2019. I think when we see it in the carousel in the images, it's the fossil in a kind of a bag where it's vacuum sealed. So it's interesting to think of this object sealed from 2019 to now, and it has the exact date and coordinates where we found them. Obviously, without the intention of it ever being in this exhibition or in this piece, it's really interesting to kind of really mark a time of where we found it, but the fossil itself kind of explodes the timeline of the exploration in this piece, in the sense that it is something that's existed way before us uncovering it, which was quite interesting when we found it, I think, in 2019. And it was found here in Riyadh, so it was found in Al-Manakh, which is the southeastern part of the city. It's in a cement factory, and it was in a quarry that's dug 40 meters deep. So in the middle of nowhere, we kind of bumped into this little fossil. It's really quite an interesting object to find in the middle of the desert in Riyadh.
Do you want to add to that, Fahad?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Not sure to echo Ala's, but I think what's interesting is we're almost sort of literally sealed time, which I think found objects that we found in Al-Manakh, in that area that Ala mentioned.
And tell us about that area, because I think it's important. You found it in a particular industrial site, right?
So initially it wasn't. It's actually the highest sort of point in Riyadh. So I'm guessing strategically that's why the cement factory is situated, just because of the excavation that needs to sort of happen. So the quarry is 40 meters deep, as Ala mentioned, and what's interesting is that the cement factory had a monopoly on cement for 40 years. So the quarry actually equals Riyadh's skyline, which is very interesting to see this almost negative space in the city. And we by sheer coincidence, found this faucet literally in the middle of the quarry, amongst these huge trucks and conveyor belts and sort of workers that didn't have time for us and for our silly questions. So yeah, it's just a great coincidence, I would say.
Yeah. Thank you for projecting us deep into the past, but also that image of the transition from earthen architecture to concrete, in that everything built in the last 40 years came out of that pit in Riyadh, is really so powerful. Abdul Rahman, you selected glass and with Turkey. You had to go find it in your studio. Everybody that is Saudi that comes to the installation immediately goes, oh yeah, I have that in my house. Tell us about that glass.
I think, well, first, you still owe me going to that quarry. And I still remember you in that exhibition telling me that you're going to take me. So I'm still so jealous that you went without me. I think, yeah, that glass is so meaningful, I think, to everyone. And actually, we're doing an installation with that glass in Doha. And I was talking to someone who was telling me that it also reminded them of that glass in Kuwait. So I think it's all over the place. We keep searching. This glass is something that we've been collecting kind of inherently. We've been researching and collecting for the past 6 years. It's something that we've been questioning. It's in a house. It's been in the house that we were born in, and it still exists in that house where my cousins live in an area called Sharafiyya. This glass is called, or at least it's called in Jeddah, Guzaz Mka'ak, or so we've learned. Every glass place I've been to, and actually when we were installing a couple of days ago, I incidentally was walking by a glass shop, and also, of course, it was Egyptians that operate the shop, and they keep telling me that it's still made in Egypt. This glass is out of fashion here. Glass is made out of sand. Sand is made out of dust, as you've made it. And I think, as you've put it, I think is quite interesting. There's so many layers that you can put into it, but it's so fascinating. Dust makes up a lot of the country, but it exists everywhere. I think we think of these things in so many different ways, but once we've started kind of researching motifs of architecture, and we started looking at what makes up the very facets of architecture in Jeddah, this glass just kind of made sense. Suddenly we started collecting it, and it was like, okay, this exists in so many different parts of Jeddah. It exists in Al-Ula, it exists in different parts in Riyadh, although we couldn't find it in Riyadh, strangely. Even when we were trying to get it to you, it was hard to find it here, so it just made sense to send you broken bits, which I think came out poetically correct. I'll leave the rest to Turkey, because...
Yeah, Turkey, thank you. This, in my understanding too, is that there was a moment when big windows were introduced in Saudi Arabia where people were worried about privacy, and this glass provided that privacy, you know, because you can't see through it. Is that right?
Yeah, I think we've encountered this glass quite regularly when we were documenting a lot of the areas, the modern expansion of Jeddah. especially in the areas, the neighborhoods that popped up in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And I think that it was something that was, very easily accessible. It was industrially produced, and it was just, simply in fashion. So you see it a lot in buildings in the 70s and 80s. And for us, when we started collecting it just because, it had that, interesting pattern and nostalgic kind of, it triggered that kind of nostalgia about these old, our grandmother's house, where we grew up. And then we quickly started to realize that it is really becoming harder and harder to find. And also, we're also, realizing that a lot of people identify with this glass and, recognize it immediately. And, as Abdurrahman said, even, in Kuwait and even, sometimes even in Egypt and in Turkey. And for us, what's really interesting is that this really strong motif is really perceived in, contemporary discourse on heritage as something disposable or negligible, just, one phase of industrialization. And we really wanted to, highlight this, highlight it as a specific moment in the development of our country. We keep going back to the traditional vernacular and the earth architecture, the old, wooden windows of the old town of Jeddah, at least. But this was also, this is the Jeddah that our grandparents built. Why is that not taken seriously as part of our development? How can we look at this early modern development after the discovery of oil as a definitive moment that shaped our identities today? So I think that really, puts a big question mark on what we say, as the triangle, the Najdi triangular windows or the fenestration or the intricate patterns, what shapes our identity, or this early industrialized period.
I think for experimental preservation, so much of it is to test what can be heritage, and clearly the test in this exhibition is working because, as I said, every Saudi that goes there says, oh yeah, I connect to that, it's part of my collective memory. So you raise a really good point. The shape of the broken glass that you sent is very particular. One of them has this kind of S shape. And when Philip Tenari who curated the previous biennial, he came and he said, oh, Duchamp's 3 standard stoppages. Immediately. And so I decided the one on the left right there is exactly the shape of Duchamp's 3 standard stoppages. And so I sneaked it in there so that we look at it and think about what that means. Nawaf, you selected a formwork, a cast to make an arch. And people keep asking me, what is that thing? What is it? Why did you choose it?
It's really out there now. So to better answer your question, Jorge, I think that I'm going to need to take a few steps back. Not so many people know that the legendary architect Hassan Fathi was actually commissioned by Saudi to basically come up, design and build prototype houses for Diriyah and Al-Jumum near Mecca al-Mukarrama. This was in 1965. So so basically Hassan Fathi came, stayed for an undisclosed period of time. He was to start at Diriyah, so he actually came to Diriyah. He met as many people as he possibly could in Diriyah. He visited as many farms, as many remaining structures as he possibly could. He took down so many notes, jotted down so many sketches, first impressions, architectural elements, whatever caught his attention, and he basically turned this into his, or tried to turn it into a prototype house that would basically encourage sustainable rural living. So this was to be transformed into sort of, it was to be propagated throughout the entire sort of Diriyah to basically promote this sort of sustainable living. So he actually designed 2 prototype houses. The first one had all the trademarked Hassan Fathi vaults and domes and so many experimental spaces. But this one was, so this design was actually rejected. It was believed to be not fitting of the like the local vernacular. At that time, Najd didn't have any sort of vaulted spaces, vaulted roofs, any domes. So it was basically rejected. So Hassan Fathi resorted to another design, another prototype house, which was very bleak, very rigid, very simple. I don't think that he was actually satisfied with that second design, but I mean, that's how things go. So this one was actually built. It was constructed. But the project didn't accomplish what it set out to do. It stayed up for a couple of months, I think. It was demolished. He didn't get the chance to actually do the one in Al-Jumum. So this is where the idea actually popped into our heads. We wanted to experiment with whatever limited material that actually existed in the Hassan Fathi archives about the Diriyah prototype house project. So we actually took whatever remaining material that we found about the unbuilt prototype house, the one with the vaults, the one with the molds, and we decided to turn it into a proper working drawing. We decided to build a section of that house, a section that had a dome, a section that had a vault. So to basically make a long story short, this is the mold of the vaulted space that we created, where you basically stack earthen blocks on top of it and like leave it to dry out for a few days, depending on the weather and the time of year that you actually build it. The crucial part also is that we actually had students from Diriyah, from the Royal Institute for Traditional Arts, to actually do the entire thing from scratch. They were actually experimenting with traditional mud and clay methods of building. So to us, this was a great opportunity to actually get them involved. So they actually built the entire thing in like a time frame of 25 days. It was really fantastic. So yeah, I decided to contribute the mold for the vaulted space of that Hassan Fathi house.
It's so beautiful to think of the idea of heritage as a remaking, as a translation, as a recreation, and of course in a lot of these works there is this idea of transformation. So we have a door, we have the smell of the house, we have a roof, we have the deep underground of the house, we have the transmission of the light in the house, and we also have a window. And Ahmed, you contributed a window. Tell us about this window. Everybody's asking about this window. Yes. Where does it come from? Why did you pick it?
Okay, this window for me represent confrontation. Al-Muwajah. It's a story. When you talk about changing in society, we live at the time of transformation. All of new generation moving to the future now. Saudi Arabia doing more in the change. Everyone say that. You know, we're living on this time of change. All of the world doing the same. After that, I start to think about something. I did the research starting 2008 and continue until 2015 about Mecca city. And I was, you know, focusing in my research about the urban side, the construction, the transformation. During the research, and everyone talk about that, and in Saudi Arabia now, even in the TV and films and shows, they start talk about 79. as a year that everyone remember in Mecca. Mecca was under the siege by extremists. So during that time, in 2012, I went to the construction company in Mecca and I asked them about the underground window that was inside the Mecca. They say they have all of them in a warehouse, and they start to change this in the 2 expansion. So it's still there. So I ask if I can find and go through them. They say yes. And one of the old engineering, I remember he was Palestinian, friend there, and I told him, he say, there is some window, if you are lucky, you will find the tracing of the bullets from the confrontation between the military and the Juhayman in front of police, which is represent very big moment in the chain of this country. Okay, but 79 is not only change in Saudi Arabia. I think they called it the Sesame year, where a lot of things change in the Middle East, and I think worldwide. So this is the window, have this thing. So for me, preserving the story and the confidence of change and the history of that. And when I take it, my question was, is it true? Maybe this is not a bullet or something. But then after that, everyone proved for me it's a real. But I said, at least it's the evidence of the change of the time that happening there. Also, it's related to me because my father was a soldier, and he was there in Mecca at that time. He usually tell me how much was very difficult for everyone, for every family. And the year that I born in the same year.
Oh, I didn't know that. You were born
in 79. So my father usually told me this year was the most difficult year in all of the families, and the fear was in all of the people in their house, in their home. So I decided to contribute with this to preserve not only the object, but the memory, the story, the confrontation, because we are now in another confrontation to move to the future. And the generation now making the optimistic future. It's very optimistic everywhere. That's what is important. So I decided to participate by this, and when I see the light and the shadow of this window, I like the scenography. Thank you so much. It's even represent more idea for me. So also it's like mashrabiyya, but with very strong steel structure. Yeah.
Well, it really is attracting a lot of attention from people coming asking about it, and also it's a really beautiful notion that you can stand on both sides and that you can think about the future and the past as something that moves through these kinds of windows. You raise the documentary value, the importance of preserving the artifacts as a way to be able to show the fact that something actually did happen. So I think that's also incredibly important, as many of you are trying to open up. I wanted to now that open up a little bit the conversation, and please feel free to jump in with any thoughts. But it seemed to me that another really important aspect of this was the role that women are having in Saudi society, and many of you have spoken to that. The role of and you as also participating in that as female artists. It seemed to me, I was really blown away by your work and about the contributions that you're making, and thinking about the house as when you look at this whole wall, you have the elements of the house, but you have to put it together in your mind. So there's a kind of futuristic imagination about what is the domestic space, and how moving out or in and out of that, opening it up, the fragments. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about that, because these works that you selected are also inspirations for each of you, I think. And certainly, Filwa, in your work, you work with textiles. So it was amazing that you picked a textile to an inspirational textile. So I wanted to hear a little bit about that too, because I think you've also, through the objects that you picked, there are a commentary on the kind of the role of female artists in this transformation as well. So I wanted to hear a little bit about the inspiration that you draw from that dress, the inspiration that you draw from this, and we can all jump in, please, by all means. So, yeah.
So, in my work, I've been thinking about garments and clothes as containers of energy. And I think of them as spaces that contain all kinds of things, emotions, memories, energies. When I started thinking of these clothes as spaces, I started, thinking of what is a space and how do we inhabit spaces. And in the beginning, the first thing I thought of as a space is the home. So the home, what is the home, and how does the space of the home mirror, our bodies, which is also another space that is a container of all kinds of things. So in that sense, when I came across, through my research, I don't really every time delve into heritage or traditional pieces, but every now and then I do for particular reasons, for conceptual reasons. And I came across in my research this particular dress, and it links to so many memories. It links also to a moment, a very personal moment of transition in every woman's life. It's a bridal dress. It's the dress that a woman traditionally in the past, she wears it the morning after the wedding night. The morning when her husband's family come to visit to bear gifts. So she's in her full, most beautiful attire, and she's wearing this heavily embroidered dress. But the part that was the most interesting, and it comes, it's the title of the dress, is that the embroidery is inspired by motifs of doors. And it made me really think about these ladies that were designing and embroidering certain motifs that, that comes from the environment where they live. It makes me think of them sitting and reflecting and looking at their domestic surroundings. They're looking at architectural elements. They're looking at doors. They're looking at windows. And they're incorporating that to show beauty, in what they wear.
If you had to if I said that you can't take your object back, but you can only take somebody else's object back, because at the end of this show, right, you all get your object back, but what if I said you can't take your object back, you have to take another one back? Which one would you take? Would you...
I know what I'm going to take.
Which one would you take?
I'm going to take the window of the bullet, the trace of the bullet of the incident in '79. I remember it. I was born before, and I remember watching the news when I was a really young child, and then being faced with that and looking at the trace was somehow surreal for me, even after many, many decades. So definitely I'll take your window.
Ahmed, what would you take? You have to let go of the window. Can't have the window.
I know that, Ahmed. Yeah,
I was planning after the session to ask him about the Hassan Fathi. I will take Nawaf, Hassan Fathi, and I will ask him even more for all of the plan.
Vacation, please.
I was talking to Ahmed a few weeks ago, and he said, you know what, let's do something. Let's rebuild an entire house. I want to move there. I want to.
Yes,
I want to
want
start
to build
selling
it
it.
real.
So many like grand ideas and so on.
I mean, he has so many houses in Jeddah, by the way. Yeah.
But I mean, to me, so what we try to do with the house is to look sort of beyond the house and start maybe questioning, I don't know, coming up with questions like, okay, first of all, why was this house even rejected? You know, why was this design rejected? Why didn't people take on this building technique? Like, why are domes and vaults not considered as a part of the vernacular? Although it's very convenient, very easy to construct. They have like lots of great performative qualities. So to me, like those are the questions that I really hope this house inspires, rather than just rebuilding the entire house for the sake of having a Hassan Fathy house.
We know you can't have the form back because he's taking it.
Yeah.
So what are you gonna take?
I'm taking the Gazzaz brothers, of course.
Oh yes, okay.
I think the question that you're raising with this vault is very relevant, and I think this is something we face a lot with contemporary commissions or competitions. It's that no, this is the vernacular. This is not vernacular. And I think for us, this kind of at this point we're reaching a point where it's really becoming a hard line where this is what it is, and I think that it just makes the whole story a lot less interesting. Because I think if you look at our old cities, it's always dynamic, and even the vernacular is, really something that incorporates different techniques from different places, and it was always evolving. So I think it really raises a very valid point, both in terms of how do you define a vernacular, but also how do you incorporate new technologies and new motifs, and so.
If I may, I
Please.
would definitely take the glass with me because I think the question around what is the future heritage and what is the heritage of the future is actually something that should be discussed from everybody. The young generation doesn't immediately feel the connection with the past, but they have their own memories of the house of their parents and grandparents. And to deep dive and give value to this heritage is very important. We risk, with the speed of development around us, that this is going to disappear. And I come from a country where everything that was 40 and 50s and 60s has been very quickly demolished because it was not considered enough important. And this is a risk of losing that legacy. And it's not about tradition only. It's about what is legacy, what is heritage, what is important, and what is important for the next generation.
We already lost a lot.
So your glass, thankfully, you
I'll
have
take
lots
the
of
sand.
pieces. So go ahead.
I'll take the sand.
The sand.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can't have the sand back. Sorry.
I can mix it with so
Why?
many
Why
things.
would you? This is World Heritage dust. So why would you
I'll
take?
mix it with so many things and make
That
so
was
many
my
things
choice
with
too.
it. I can make glass with it. I can mix it with concrete. I can ram it into earth. I can make a lot of things with it. I can
That's
pour
a
it
beautiful
into
image
concrete.
of actually mixing the past into new
You
forms.
can make new things with it. Yeah. It's fun. Yeah.
Hello, you can't take your fossil back.
I'm so glad there's 6 pieces of glass because they can go around. And I think Turkey and Abdurrahman, Fad and I have a similar dynamic where we're the hoarders and we collect everything, and then they're the ones that kind of tell us not to. And you guys just moved this year, and we have to move as well this year to another studio, and just the amount of stuff. I'll give you all of it for a piece of glass. if you
And to answer actually your first question in this panel discussion, me and Basma moved into our new apartment, and we actually didn't throw anything away. So we didn't have to choose to
This
throw
is the
anything.
hoarder in both
Yeah,
of us.
literally.
I suppose you moved into a bigger apartment.
I mean, yeah, we just hoarded everything. We just had to reshuffle, and we keep reshuffling and playing these games of finding what is that one new tiny thing in the house and we actually end up finding it. So
Yeah.
it's quite fun.
It's amazing to see all the works and to hear the conversation, because there is this sense in which you're all, you know, really absorbing a kind of moment and using these objects as in a generative way. You know, new works are coming out of these. You're being inspired by them, and you're communicating that to everyone. So I want to give an opportunity to everyone that joined us here to contribute to the conversation. So if you have thoughts, comments, questions, ideas about which object you'd like to run away with, we have security, so you can't really run away with, but let's imagine that you might run away with one of these pieces. How does this strike you, and are there any questions that you have for some of our panelists? Please, yeah. I think we have a microphone moving around.
Thank you so much for all of your insights, and it's really interesting to hear the background on this work, having seen it yesterday. As it was mentioned on the panel, obviously vernacular or colloquial is very, time specific. So what might be vernacular to my generation might not be the same to someone in a different generation. And seeing that this work kind of encompasses several generations of architects and designers and thinkers, what do you think the vernacular would look like if you were preserving these works maybe 100 years from now? Or how did this term differ maybe from one artist to the next? And we kind of touched on that, but if anyone else has any thoughts.
So the question is, if I understand correctly, if you did not preserve these objects,
or rather in 100 years from now,
what would it look? What do you imagine the future to be? Yeah. Yeah, the vernacular of life. How is that being integrated in your work? Do you think about, when you generate your artworks, to make a connection with the vernacular, with the everyday, with the kind of habits, the habitual, the kind of repetitive, the unthought? Because those, in a way, I think that's also what we mean by the everyday, is those. I think a lot of one of my pleasures in this work is that a lot of the way that we describe art, and especially the work of artists, is the exception. This is the best work, the exceptional work, and we talk about life that way. The curriculum vitae. These are my greatest achievements. But in fact, you can't have a great achievement unless you have just a background, and that vernacular life seems to me very present in, like, Dania, you have a whole piece over there where you're looking at the earth and the fragments of earth and how you step on the earth. Just trying to give them some time to think about your question, how does the vernacular play, the habitual, the everyday play into your creative process?
I mean, my practice, part of my practice is about memory, social conditioning, and the everyday. And with preservation, it's so hard, it's challenging to push the boundaries of traditional decisions about what is important and what is not, what things do we give worth to. So, and it's an ever-evolving decision, right? So, I mean, all these objects and practices that reflect cultural, societal, and environmental narratives are really, really important in deciding what to keep and what to discard. So it's always a daily decision, because, you always reflect, is this important? For example, the incense burner. It's very common. It's a ubiquitous thing. And it's becoming slowly it's still used, but not as much as before. The deroma, the natural, the bark of the tree that was used as a lipstick, was an everyday item, and now it's nearly obsolete. So it's a decision that, and as an artist, I always reflect on, and it really influences my practice.
It's amazing to think of the idea of the everyday, the ubiquitous becoming, when it starts to disappear, it becomes exceptional, or because you don't see it every day all of a sudden. But to have one foot in each of those moments where you recognize it as both ubiquitous and exceptional is part of, I can see that in your work, where things that you work with are in that liminal space between the two. Are there other questions or comments from those of you here? Francesca and then Marwan.
Sorry, I'd like to ask you, Jorge, in your practice as it's evolved, I've been following your work for some time, and I'm amazed and very humbled by your gesture to involve many local artists in this one work. And how did this idea come to you? How did this effort of collaboration come? What did this conversation come from?
Thank you. I thought I was going to get away with that being asked a question.
Not with me in the room.
That's why I took the moderator role so happily. It came, you know, it's been a process. I think for me, I realized that as I've evolved in my own practice, it's engaging with other artists has been one of the most productive and generative aspect. And when I came here, I was just blown away and, to use your word, humbled by the amazing quality of the work being done here. And I just felt so compelled to enter into a conversation about that as a way to learn and as a way to exchange, because it seems to me that one of the great things about our practice is our ability to communicate through art, you know, that art is a great mode of communication. And so to engage with one another in that communication and to be part of a conversation just was really something that felt very natural. And I'm so thankful that you all were willing to engage as well in this conversation, because it is an act of translation. You know, in a way, art is always an act of translation from one medium to another, one culture to another. So getting outside was for me very important. And this for me is also the beginning of a bridge around some affinities in terms of practices that working with heritage, because I think we have a lot more in common because of our practices than because of the accident of our birth. You know, we don't choose where we're born, but we choose what we do with our lives. And I think that is something that I felt really a real affinity with all of your practices. So that's how and this is the first time I do this, by the way. So this is not, but I feel like this is really generative for me of new kinds of, I hope that we'll continue to add to the library. Because for me, a library, of course, is the place where you go to learn something. So,
you know, actually, I have been thinking about this, and maybe we haven't really spoke about this for a while, or ever actually. First of all, thank you for inviting us to do this. I think you are the library and you are the house. It's been so generous of you to invite each and every one of us to do this. It's kind of an artwork with the absence of the artist, but with such a powerful presence of the artist, to have such probably a difficult conversation with each and every one of us to manage, to reach out to us, to email each and every one of us, to have a conversation, to record, to do all of this. It must have been hell, probably, for you to do this with us, you know. So I think maybe it is a great time to turn the question on you. So how has it kind of, how did it turn out to be like that, to become the library of earthen architecture?
I'm, you know, it's amazing the accidents, you know, that happened. It was like, for example, we could have just had doors, all doors, you know. We could have just had all windows. We could have had, you know, but it was just so amazing that everyone kind of, it's almost like everyone went around the house, this imaginary house of the future, and kind of, you know, made very intentional decisions. And how it all came together also, strangely, when I looked at it, you know, the relationship to Duchamp is so there, you know, the Duchamp has this famous glass of the bride, you know, the bride up top. I decided to, oh, there it is. And we have all the elements somehow. Like we have the bride, We have the window, the glass, we have the dust, we have the lines, the circular lines, and so this idea of the ready-made for me is as a practice that Duchamp really introduced into art at a biennial, not a biennial, but a big art show. You know, it was the equivalent of the biennial. So to introduce that kind of shift, you know, where he introduced the ready-made, and it really has changed practice. It made it possible for certain kinds of artworks to exist. And for me, it was really powerful to see your practices, your relationship to heritage as a way of rethinking what's possible to make in terms of art and the artistic imagination. So I'm hoping that out of this, this will be the beginning of a conversation about including artists in the heritage project of Saudi Arabia, because there is an amazing opportunity here. You are creating the heritage infrastructure now. That, you know, in other places, it's very old. It's a couple hundred years old. So to not make the same mistakes that everybody else made, but to imagine a new kind of heritage, I think it's essential to have artists in this conversation. Right now, there's a monopoly in heritage between archaeologists, planners, architects, historians, and there's a very tight grip on heritage. And I really believe that in Saudi, there's an opportunity for artists to be included in the decision-making process about what heritage is. And that takes a lot of courage, but I hope that the Ministry of Culture and whoever is, you know, there will think about this possibility, because all of you are experts in heritage. There's no question in my mind that you should be in charge of deciding what's heritage here. So that's what's inspiring for me. So yeah, thank you. Marwan, you had a question. Oh, should we? Can he? One last question.
It was just a beautiful answer,
Yeah, thanks for putting this together. It's a brilliant idea, and it's good also to meet most of the names I'm familiar with. I met new people here, I think. I'm just intrigued. I mean, if I'm a visitor to this exhibition, and I relate to your statement in the beginning, which is what you throw, what you keep. So if I stand in front of this, by the way, I love the window. I love all of them, but the window relate personally to me from Lebanon and the war. So I think this is also this kind of traces from the war. But my question is, I'm not an artist. I'm visiting this exhibition. And is the message that I want to get is those pieces has to be preserved, or maybe it's a direction to reuse or to upcycle. Just saying this, having lived in Japan, I'm Lebanese 7 years, you hardly can see such a statement in Japanese society, because it's by nature, you upcycle, you recycle, you reuse. The old and the new coexist, the wabi-sabi and so on. So here, what do we want to tell the Saudi audience in particular, and in general, the audience in the Arab world? And we know the recycling in the Arab world, how challenging it is as an attitude. So are we saying, I mean, maintain getting married in this beautiful dress, keep on using, and this is as an architect, really use earth architecture now and contemporary architecture, knowing the lobby of concrete and the developers. I think, how do you think you're sending this message, each one of you, whether the textile, whether the glass, whether the window? And do you think there will be ear really to listen to those messages, that these are not pieces to be frozen in time, but to be used and even regenerated? Thank you.
I think I'm going to turn it to you, since you have a project that seems in the window.
It's a the big question, not only for the heritage, also for the concept of a museum today. Museum today is struggling a lot from the idea of freezing, from preserving, from things. And the idea in front of that, how to make it living and recycling or use it. Window could be a window in a place that have this two part and can be a living, but it has this trace of memory that related to something. So it's a big question. And it's, I think, most of the museum now trying to go out from the doors to a living life again, and to open those walls and to be part of the life. Rather than visitor come to the museum now, I think they should come to the life, to the museum, to things. And such a question is, I think it's a big, to answer, it's need and, you know, and motivation of a new ideas and more study and more trials to, because if you think about it in a big time in architect, are we, you know, like just trying to fix this old wall and imitate them and build the same old building again and again and go to the heritage and still build with the same, or we represent our time now? We are now, yeah, working now. Are we, you know, like trying to imitate the past? So what about now, who we are now? This is a very important question, and this is happening a lot now in our time. A lot of, you know, archaeology or historian or, you know, architect who relate to heritage, they say we need to rebuild this building like before 200 years before. So, but that's the question today.
And I'm reminded of your work, how you integrate all the different, you know, historical illuminations of books and then introduce the new X-rays into them. Yeah, it's fabulous. Well, I'm afraid we're out of time, but I just want to once again express my deep gratitude to all of you and my admiration for your work. I am really grateful that you participated in this. I think this was a lot of fun. And the, you know, the piece is there for all of us to enjoy. I want to also thank all of you for coming. I know it's a very busy program, so you making the time for this. And I'm going to call out Ute, who just walked in, and thank her for this great biennial. Bravo, Ute. This was amazing. Thank you all. Okay.
But Jorge, you asked the artists which pieces can they pick. Can the audience pick some of the?
Yes, yes.
Just to know. Thank you.